In the snowy mountainous wilderness of Canada's far northwest lies the Nahanni National Park Reserve. Established in 1972, the reserve consists of 11,600 square miles of wild rivers, canyons, and waterfalls, a place of such natural beauty that it was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site just 6 years after it was founded. Yet the park's spectacular views and unmatched serenity mask a dark and sinister past, one filled with tribal warfare, mysterious disappearances, and gruesome murder. The Dene First Nations peoples have inhabited the lands around Nahanni National Park Reserve for thousands of years. According to their oral history, the Dene were once locked into a bitter and bloody struggle with a neighboring tribe known as the Naha. The Naha made their homes in the foothills of what are now known as the Mackenzie Mountains, while the Dene dwelled on the valley floors below. This made the Dene particularly susceptible to Naha's lightning-fast raiding techniques, while their own uphill counterattacks proved bloody and futile affairs. If the Dene wished to live in peace, they had to strike back at the Naha with such viciousness that they would be forever driven from their mountain homes. But since the Naha warriors vastly outnumbered their own, the Dene would have to execute an effective and decisive ambush, one that would deliver a knockout blow and end the many years of costly conflict. Before they struck, the Dene waited for a new moon, ensuring their attack took place on the darkest night of the month. Then, while creeping up the pitch-black hillsides, the Dene planned to silently pounce on any Naha patrols they came across, cutting their enemies' throats to ensure none of them could raise the alarm. But curiously, even as they got within arrow shot of the main Naha encampment, not a single enemy warrior could be seen. Silence greeted Dene warriors as they reached the perimeter of the enemy camp, and for a moment it seemed as if though they'd caught their tormentors completely unaware. Yet as they stormed the Naha teepee tomahawks primed to taste the blood of their foes, they realized the camp was completely deserted. There were food stocks still remaining in the camp, fires still smoldering away, but there were no Naha tribesmen to be seen. It was as if life at the camp had just suddenly and inexplicably stopped. The incident so terrified the war band that the story has since passed into Dene legend, and it's said that following that night, the warriors dared not venture into the hills anymore, lest they be taken by whatever made the Naha disappear. Hundreds of years later, the promise of gold prompted the arrival of European settlers in the area. But as the trickle of migrants became a torrent of prospectors, some of their numbers seemed to vanish into thin air. Perhaps the most famous tale is from the year of 1905 and details two brothers named Frank and Willie Emlead. Frank and Willie trapezed through a brutal northwestern winter until they reached a place known as Gold Creek. And after a few weeks of panning and searching, they were rewarded with a sizable amount of gold. The following spring, the brothers returned to Nahanni to collect more gold. Only this time they were accompanied by a small team of fellow prospectors. The weather was more favorable. They were in a larger group, and each man was more than capable of surviving the frigid tundra, yet not a single one of them were ever seen again. 3 years later, the Emlead's younger brother led a team up into the mountains, intent on uncovering the fate of his older siblings. Their only discovery were 2 skeletons at a creekside camp down in the valley. Both victims appeared to have their heads torn off. From that day forth, the valley had become known as Dead Men's Valley, while the creek has earned the rather uncreative nickname of Headless Creek. Yet it wasn't just the unfortunate Emlead brothers who mysteriously lost their lives in the park during the early 20th century. At the beheads of a large mining corporation, a Scottish mining engineer had visited Nahanni shortly after the Emleads went missing. His goal was to survey a potential mining site and was being paid handsomely for his work. But for some reason, the engineer failed to return in order to collect his pay. A search party was sent into Nahanni in order to bring the engineer home alive, but not a single trace of him could be found. Then, when the search party returned, they brought with them a chilling story indeed. In order to aid their navigation of Nahanni's hills and valleys, the search party had enlisted the help of some guides from the Den tribe. But when the search team asked their guides to take them up into mountains the engineer had been tasked with surveying, the tribesmen flat out refused. Later reports suggested that the tribesmen were terrified at the prospect of going up into the mountains, especially after sundown, and threatened to abandon their guests should they attempt to climb them, but when asked what exactly scared them so much, the tribesmen seemed unable or unwilling to explain. Over a decade later, in 1917, a Yukon-based prospector by the name of Martin Jorgensen wandered into the hills around Nahanni. He'd heard of many other gold hunters striking it rich in the area, and having exhausted all options in his native territory, he packed up and moved out into the hills in search of his fortune. A few months later, Martin apparently wrote to his family informing them that he had stumbled across the biggest gold vein he'd ever seen and promised them that they'd soon be some of the wealthiest people in all of Yukon. The letter was the last Martin's family had ever heard from him. Another search party was sent into the hills. Only this one found the man that they were looking for. Martin was found leaning up against the smoldering wreck of the cabin he'd been renting, his head having been torn clean off. Some have suggested Martin's murder was perpetrated by those envious of his gold discovery, and that the number one suspects should have been whoever came in possession of his gold claim. Yet, shortly after he was murdered, local newspaper reports began to circulate claiming that the beheading incidents were related to so-called headhunters. It's not clear if the term headhunters is a reference to bounty hunters, contract killers, or was merely a nod to the gruesome nature of the crime, but the phrasing certainly frightened those who read the article, having firmly established a reputation as being a perilous place to explore. Visits to the Nahanni National Park dropped off following the initial gold rush. Over time, it became an obscure wilderness that few people cared or dared to visit, and by the 1940s, the legends of Nahanni were in danger of being forgotten. But by 1946, Canadian mining companies had begun to cast a greedy eye over the relatively untouched Mackenzie Mountains, a portion of which are a protected area of the park. One company tasked a Calgary-based mining expert named Frank M. Wenderson with surveying several potential mining sites. So, accompanied by his longtime partner Jack Patterson, Frank plotted the course between the sites, then hiked up into the hills to begin his work. One day, Anderson and Patterson decided to split up in order to cover more ground, but agreed to meet at a spot near Virginia Falls when the work day was over. They agreed that the first man to arrive would carve a small symbol into a large, distinctive-looking tree. That way, the other would know that they had finished their work and had headed back to camp. When the workday was over, Frank Henderson was the first to arrive at the tree. So, he carved the agreed-upon symbol and wandered back to camp to await the arrival of his partner. Yet, as the hours went by and Jack failed to return to camp, Frank became increasingly worried for his friend and colleague. As night fell and Jack had still not returned to camp, Frank knew that something must have happened to his partner to cause him to be so late. Then at sunrise, when Jack's tent was still empty, Frank hiked off into the woods in search of his missing friend. The search barely lasted an hour. As Frank walked, he began to feel an increasing sense of disorientation, as once familiar patches of forest started to feel almost alien to him. Before long, he was so overcome with fright that he rushed back to his campsite, packed his things, then fled the area with Jack still missing. Several weeks later, he returned to the Nahanni National Park to search for his missing colleague. But like so many others who'd gone before him, there was no trace of Jack Patterson to be found. But even on that second visit, with a veritable platoon of men in tow, Frank still felt that same inexplicable terror creeping upon him. That night, Frank and the search team were awoken by a group of First Nations men who rode into camp and warned of something terrifying. The men claimed that they had spotted pale ghostly shapes moving along the valley below, and that the search party should join them in fleeing the area. Naturally, Frank and the team obliged the young men, packed up their things, then hiked out of Nahanni, never to return. To use Frank's own words, there is absolutely no denying the sinister atmosphere of that whole valley. The weird, continual wailing of the wind is something I won't soon forget. Over the years that have followed, there have been countless other reports of similar deaths and disappearances occurring in the Nahanni National Park. It should also be noted that plane crashes are so common among a section of the Mackenzie Mountains that the area has earned the nickname Funeral Range. So why are such mysterious and terrifying events so common in Nahanni National Park? Aside from the fact that the place consists of such unforgiving terrain, Nahanni is home to some of the most deadly and active predators in the world. Nahanni is a wilderness in the very sense of the word, and food is scarce for all those that wander its hills. A hungry bear or wild cat would have no issue with stalking and killing a human, and that might well account for some of the disappearances. Or perhaps there's some other reason why people keep dying and disappearing from Nahanni National Park. Maybe it has something to do with the disappearance of the Naha tribe all those years ago, and to solve one case would answer a 1,000-year-old question. But maybe the answer to that question is far too terrifying for us to possibly comprehend. Hey friends, thanks so much for watching. Just a quick heads up, I release new videos every second Tuesday at 7:00 p.m. EST. Also, check out my main channel, Let's Read, where you can hear longer compilations of interesting, scary stories just like these. And if you prefer audio only, feel free to check out the Let's Read podcast, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All linked in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you in the next one.